Welcome everybody to this officials education session titled Your First International Event as an Official. How did you get there? Now, my name is Darren Wenzer. I'm the Head of Coach and Volunteer Development with Little Athletics New South Wales. Now, we have a really interesting panel of New South Wales officials to chat with this evening, who are going to give us some insights and some stories, some information, some behind the scenes looks at what it takes on what it is like to get to and be involved in the first international event. Now, before we go to the panel and I introduce them, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are all situated today. I'm here at home in North Parramatta, which is traditional Darug land. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us here today. Now, over to the panel. Now, I'm just going to quickly go through the panel and let you know who they are. Tonight, we have with us Steve Dunn, Michael Harmey, Katrina Morrow, Garth Pereira, and Kim Robinson. And they're going to all have a chance to tell you a little bit about their story and their involvement in their first international competition. And that's where we're going to start. What was this officiating journey? Now, in a moment, I'm going to start with Steve and then on to Michael. But Steve, in a nutshell, how did you get into athletics and then end up officiating at your first international event?
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Good evening, everyone. My athletics journey started, I guess, as a child watching the Olympics, and I love the Olympics. I love the athletics particularly, and it was the only thing I ever watched on the Olympics was the athletics. I only got to compete for a few years in little athletics at the age of 14, but loved doing it all the way through high school. And when I left high school and became a teacher, I had the opportunity then to pick up and run the athletics carnival at our school. And I thought, well, I need a bit of training in how to do this. And I went and joined the course, and Barry and John, as great mentors as they are, ran that course. And at the end of it, John, I think it was John who said to me, why don't you come along and officiate at the combined high schools carnival in September? And I thought, oh, that might be something I could do. And went along to that and had an absolute ball. Just loved officiating, loved being in that atmosphere, loved watching kids compete at the absolute best level, the highest level. And from there, I didn't really look back. I kept going back, doing more events. I did things like All Schools, New South Wales Championships, New South Wales Junior Championships, and just absolutely loved it. It was tricky for me because I live in Goulburn, which is a good 2 hours from Sydney. So I could only really go and do the major events. But it was thanks to people who were mentoring me on the ground. People like Ron Richter, Peter Reynolds, Graham Dwight, Tony Smythe, Tony O, those kind of people who kept coming, or encouraged me to keep coming back and doing more and more events. And then I think it might have been the Junior Championships, New South Wales Junior Champs one year. And someone said, oh, you're going to put your hand up for the Commonwealth Games. And I thought, I've only been officiating for a few years. I'm not going to be anywhere near capable or good enough to do that kind of event. And they said, no, anyone can do it, and put your hand up and put your name down for it. So I did that, and I was ecstatic to get a place in the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast in 2018. So such a thrill to go from, in 5 or 6 years of officiating, to go from, picking it up as a high school teacher to then officiating at a major international event.
It's a really interesting story, Steve, because I think a lot of people are under the impressions you have to have officiated for 25 years before you get an international event. And your story shows that that's not necessarily the case. So I think it's really worthwhile people do know that. So thanks for that, Steve. And Michael, and then I'll go to Katrina. But Michael, what's your story? Now, Michael, you're just on mute. You just have to take yourself off mute. I knew that would happen at least once this evening. I'll tell you what, oh, you're there, Michael? Sorry. You got us. Good, there you go.
Hi, Darren. I just want to echo what Steve said before I forget. All the support from all the ANSW officials and even the AA people when I eventually met them. They're just so supportive and encouraging, and they really help you get through, improve throughout your progression. I started in athletics when I was at uni and competed up to national championship level at 800 metres, 1500 metres on the track, as well as cross country. And I even did a road race for 25k in Adelaide one year. But I drifted away when injuries stopped me from doing any meaningful training. I was very fortunate to meet my wife, Rosalind, through athletics. So it was natural that when our children were old enough, Bethany and Adam, that we would enrol them in little athletics. They showed some talent and stayed right through to the under-17s. It was very difficult to sit back at the centre when I could see things that could be done better and some things that were just plain wrong, like timekeeping. So I did all the D and C level qualifications and for track, and even did a B qualification in long jumps. I did the track and field officer role at my local centre for 10 seasons, where I could put everything that I knew about athletics into practice every single week. During Adam and Bethany's last few years at Little A's, they also competed at some ANSW events over both summer and winter, and I eventually moved over as well. I sat the official C grade track exam in 2013, no practicals required, scraping a pass. I even got my B level track qualifications a couple of years later. And initially I found it very hard to get appointed to national track championships. There were just so many people with more experience than me. But I did do some national cross country and world cross country trials, Sydney and Canberra GPs, which got me a foot in the door. I must have been able to show that I knew some stuff and could work in a team. And I was appointed to my first senior nationals in Sydney in 2017. So I must have left enough of a favourable impression there on the right people to give me a chance at the Com Games 1 year later.
Thanks for that, Michael. And I'll go to Katrina next, and then Garth. Katrina, what's your background in athletics and getting to that first international event?
Hi. I started just with exposure at school as a student, and then out of school just went on. I competed internationally as an athlete, and met my husband through athletics. And once we had children, they became involved at a school level and whatnot. We became involved with coaching various schools, and over time, we just felt we'd like to develop our understanding of athletics. And if ever, for instance, we saw an issue, we thought, well, if we start officiating, we get a better understanding, but we become part of the solution rather than complaining about problems that we may see. So in terms of international officiating, we heard about some Oceania events and became involved in some minor Oceania events up at Cairns, and then I think we did Youth Commonwealth Games as well. And then it just evolved from there. You know, we just grew in our knowledge and experience and applied the Com Games and was selected. So, yeah.
And thanks, Katrina. And we will be talking, everyone, a little bit about what that first international event was, what their role was, and a few memories in a moment. But firstly, of course, we want to hear from Garth about your background, Garth, and then Kim. So over to you, Garth.
Thanks, Darren, and good evening, everyone. For me, it was school. I was a cricket player and a soccer player, and my cricket skills lent themselves pretty well to javelin and discus. And I sort of did reasonably well at that, and I enjoyed watching athletics. And I think the one event that I wasn't ever allowed to get away from was probably the decathlon. Growing up, Dad was a massive fan of Daley Thompson, and watching him and watching him compete sort of made you think, well, how can someone be good across 10 events? And now as an official, I certainly understand that that's not an easy thing to do. But yeah, fast forward a few years, I started teaching at high school, and I was unpacking my car. I hadn't even started at the school yet. It was school holidays, and I had a gentleman, as I got back to my car, leaning over the side of the car and approached me and speak to me and asked me what I knew about athletics. His name was Vern Huff, and he was an official and a coach, and he sort of said, well, this is what you need to do. So from 2002 right up until about 2012, all I did was school stuff with no formal qualifications. 2012, I did my qualifications, and I did my first ANSW meet Shortly thereafter, it was New South Wales CHS in 2014. And then I did my first probably New South Wales event, which was all schools. And then that led to Australian all schools. And it sort of built from there. So from club championships to masters events, country championships, Sydney Track Classic, Canberra Track Classic, Melbourne Track Classics. I think even with one of the events that we did, we were over there, was the Perth Track Classic as well. It might have been coinciding with one of the junior events. So it's just sort of built from that. So for those of you, I guess, and for me, 2014 was when I really got in, and like Steve said, there's been no shortage of support, guidance, mentoring, which has probably certainly helped me get up to speed, because you sort of feel when you're out there with a lot more experienced officials that you need to spend 15 or 20 years trying to get this right, and that wasn't the case. I think they helped bring us up to speed, and they gave us that confidence that we were, good enough to at least to be at that level. And no different to Steve, people said, well, are you considering doing this? And I looked at them with a very strange look, and I thought, you must be kidding. But I put my nomination in, and I can honestly say that when I got that letter, when I got that email, I was incredibly excited. It was a big deal, and it was a big moment, and had to obviously keep it quiet for a few weeks and until it was all made official. But that's how I got into it. So.
Thanks for that, Garth. And it's come up a couple of times, everyone, hasn't it? This mentoring side of things that seems to be quite important in a lot of people's careers, officiating careers. So thanks for that, Garth. And Kim, on to you. Your officiating story.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for having me tonight. I was a little athletics kid in Queensland, and I went into amateur athletics for a couple of years, but then university, boys, bulls, rodeos, it all kind of took over for quite a few years. So I actually wasn't involved in athletics until I went to school. And of course, as a teacher, you pick up jobs, and one of them was to organise athletics carnivals and things like that. So I was like, okay, I got a little bit of knowledge. So I then went to the course that John and Barry offered, and I loved it. So I went home and did all the level 1 courses on the AA website, excuse me, and I wanted as much knowledge as possible. John and Barry both encouraged me to come over to Sydney as much as I could, which was a little tricky. I'm 5 hours or so from Homebush, so it was a quick trip over on a Friday afternoon after school, and then back again Sunday afternoon to school on Monday. But I think it was well worth it. I only started officiating, I think I did the course in 2013, and then, so that's only 5 years, and I was heading to Sydney as much as I could. I was really only doing school stuff at the levels for PWSA sport, and then I'd head over on the weekends and do those major events, the ANSW events and the nationals, track classics and things like that. Yes, I can't thank the people over there enough. I know there's a bit of joking between track and field, but I really appreciate anyone who is willing to offer advice. I take it on board. And then, yeah, I was blown away. It was only 5 years, and I was selected to go to the Commonwealth Games. So yeah, that's me.
Again, that's really interesting, that time and the pace of that journey in a way. I personally find that very interesting. And I said that we'd actually hear a little bit more about what that role was that you were signed up to do at your first international event. And Steve, I'm going to go back to you. We might go through in the same order again. So tell us a bit about what you did, and maybe even a key memory that you have from that event.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a throws person. So I was on predominantly throws at the Commonwealth Games. First event was the men's shot put qualifying, which was a huge eye opener. I'd never seen blokes that big, and never seen blokes that big throw that far. And funny story, in that first night, I was standing just to the side of one of the cameramen who was filming dead on to the throwing circle, and the first bloke's thrown and it's rolled and nearly hit the camera. And I've looked at this bloke and gone, "Oh, maybe we should move backwards." So yeah, did all throws at Com Games, and probably the highlight, I think, of the entire event was the night I was officiating on the women's shot put final, and just behind the throwers and to the left was Brandon Stark competing in the high jump final. So I'm sort of trying to watch what's happening with the women's shot put final, at the same time keeping one eye on what's happening over there with Brandon Stark. But the biggest thing was the noise, and I could not have anticipated the noise that came from that stadium night after night, with the support for not only the Australian athletes but everybody else. And that is to this day the story that I tell my kids. Just the atmosphere was just electric, and that was something that I hold on to forever.
Thanks, Steve. And Michael, on to you. Was the Commonwealth Games for you too? Tell us and tell us about what event it was and what your role was there. And you're still on mute there, Michael, so you just need to bring yourself off mute.
Sorry. Yeah, Steve's been looking at my notes. Yeah, the noise. My number one point was the noise from the crowd. Especially, you could really see the noise, especially if an Australian was out in front. The noise would just follow that athlete around the track, and that was just phenomenal. Things I remember. So I was one of the 29 umpires, track umpires appointed to the umpire/lap scorer. So we did all the track events. There were 3 teams. Sometimes all teams are out on the track at once. Sometimes only 2. Very rare for one. We also did the marathons, which was an early start, and early in the program there was the road walks. So a few hours stadium events there. Another memory, which something I remember, is I was allocated the job of resetting the cones from the steeplechase exit, being an inside water jump. They did the first lap around the regular lane 1. So I had to stand up. I was the only person, once the athletes had gone past that, to stand up, pick up the cones, make sure I didn't trip or drop them. And I just felt so exposed that grandstand on that far bend was just enormous. And I just felt like every single person was looking at me, but they were probably following the race. And the other thing I remember was I did actually write a couple of reports, but there was once when I was it was a women's 4x100 meter relay, and I could see quite clearly that the first Australian runner in lane 2 ran inside her lane into lane 1 for so many strides. I just looked at it and thought, I've got to report this. And I'm thinking, I'm going to disqualify Australia. And it just came home to me. I was just hoping, I just couldn't believe that I'd seen it. And of course, before it does get reported upstairs, they get the video ref to check it, and yeah, they did. But as it turned out, they didn't finish the race. But the official result on the day was DQ, not DNF. So that was me.
Thanks, Michael. And Katrina, what was your first international event, and what was your role, and what's a key memory from it?
Well, I'll speak about the Com Games in Gold Coast. It was the first major event we did. Well, we had done Youth Commonwealth Games in Samoa before that. But with the Gold Coast, I was on horizontal jumps, and and that was interesting. That was all of the things that have been said before. But interestingly, the memory I have, or some of the strongest memories I have, was my exposure to an area that that is uniquely found in the major games, and I hadn't even realised it existed. And Lorraine was in charge of it. It was I think called staging. And I thought, what's staging? And it's basically where you have the official there, and they are in charge of monitoring and making sure officials get from the check-in and call room and out onto the track. And I'm sure Lorraine was just finding jobs for us to do. So whenever we had time free, you'd go and help out. But it was great because it made you appreciate that you were actually part of something big that was happening and you were making it happen. So in terms of staging, we would just be back on the boundary, so to speak, escort athletes in, and it was lovely to get up close to some, these names you hear of, like Caster Semenya, and to see them and all of this sort of thing. So if hit numbers fell off, we had to scuttle out on the track, be unseen, pick them up, come back, because we were part of staging this event. One of the fun things I remember is, I think it was the 4x4. I think it was the men's relay, had been won by some minor, little Caribbean nation. And I had to, they were doing their lap of honour. And I was allocated the duty of keeping them moving. Well, you try and keep some excited athletes from the Caribbean moving. And that was fascinating, and just trying to keep out of sight. But come on, let's go. So, yeah.
Thanks, Katrina. We're getting some lovely inside looks here at what's happened at some of these events. Garth, your first international event, what was it? What was your role and key memories? And you're on mute. You're on mute, Garth.
Commonwealth Games as well, and call room for me. And for those of you who are in athletics and have been around, so the expression call girl was used a lot with me. I was the token call girl from ANSW, even though there were other people there. But the crowd noise, because call room was actually set up directly behind the temporary grandstand on the final bend as you're heading home the straight. So that scaffolded grandstand, when Michael talked about, you knew where we could hear it. It was a dull noise. But when athletes got to the start of that grandstand, people were stamping their feet, and whether it was day one or whether it was day 10, that sound never got old, and everyone in the call room got goosebumps. And for me, your hair standing up on end, and hearing that, and it was palpable. You could feel it as it came around. It was very, very tangible. So that was probably that was a constant. To the point where I think on the first time it happened, a few of the more senior officials, the call room referee, and actually went outside, stepped outside the call room to actually check, is everything okay? Is something collapsed? Is something falling down? What's going on? Because it was that loud. But look, there were lots of fond memories, I guess. Having an Indian background, I think the one of the incidents that stands out was having couple of men's male athletes turning up in black shorts and wanting to compete in black shorts, but that wasn't their sanctioned uniform, and having team officials come running over with the right equipment and begging and pleading of the call room referee not to disqualify their athletes. And look, I enjoyed that, probably because I thought, if anyone's going to do it, you bloody Indians, and you have to do it. So I laughed about that. And the other one, look, meeting some of the Australian athletes, and when they see you in the call room, that for them was quite relaxing for them. They came in, if there was any nerves, if they saw us as they came in, to see us, to know us by name, it gave them a sense of calm. But I think the funniest one was, if you've ever done call room, especially with throws, and Steve alluded to that, they pack everything into that bag, including the kitchen sink. If they can fit it in, they'll fit it in. So we're going through, we've got to check their bags, and I'm handing things in. There was one particular male athlete, Nigerian throw, and I said, can you open the envelope? I'm not allowed to touch certain things. Can you open it, and can I have a look? And he opens it up, and there was a few $1,000s. There was American $100 bills. And I looked at him, I looked back down the envelope, and he said, spending money. And I went, right. I said, well, I hope you're going to find it somewhere safe to put it. He said, that's all right. He said, I've got eyes in the stands everywhere. He said, I don't trust some of these people. I've got eyes everywhere. So he was just carrying that around in his backpack, and I just thought, this is welcome to the Commonwealth Games. So it was on. So
Oh, there's some great stories there, Garth. Thanks for that. Some really nice insights. And Kim, was it also Commonwealth Games for you? And what was your particular role, and also any memories?
It was my first international role, and I was just super excited to be there. I was mainly out on the jumps. I do remember walking out in our perfect lines as we did for our first event, and I remember I kicked the inside circle thing. I can't remember what it's called. I kicked it. It made the loudest noise, I think, but I stayed in line and I got out to my first event and I was thrilled to be there. Of course, the sound, the experience, being with my colleagues, I think we bonded. My roomie was from Marguerite. Hi, if you're online. She's a trackie and I thought she was just fantastic. I bonded for life. And meeting all the athletes back, all the officials as well, back where we were staying. I really enjoyed spending time with them, as well as going out onto the field for this incredible experience. One of my favorite memories was Sweet Caroline. My goodness, they played that a lot. Of course, as officials, we had to be super professional and we weren't allowed to sing. So I remember singing it on the bus home one evening. Someone found it and we sung our little hearts out. But one of my most memorable moments too was being asked to go up into the video refs room. Now I was up there to watch I think it was Nicola's high jump. I think she took out the silver. Oh, sorry, can't remember. And that was it was pretty uneventful, but it was a really good experience. And then all hell broke loose with, I think it was the men's 4x4. And the Australians were disqualified. So obviously the coaches all came in, and I remember saying to one of my sort of more senior officials, should we leave? And it was, nope, we will leave when we are asked to leave. So I was like, okay. So we just kind of sat back and watched it all unfold. It was just incredible to watch. I really enjoyed my experience.
Thanks for that, Kim. So we've heard everybody's background and where they've come from, and some great memories from what that first international experience was. I'm just going to target some questions now. And Garth, I'm just going to go to you first for this particular question. Yeah. I suppose all the officials who officiated that first international experience. So when was the moment for you where you became aware that it could be a possibility? Can you remember what that was and let us know a bit about it?
Look, yeah, there were probably Sydney Track Classic was probably the first time I guess the seed was planted, and David Rudisha ran, and I remember being at the long jump in and watching him cross the line, and just you watch him on TV, but you're watching him in person and seeing him run when you're all of 5 meters away from him, just graceful. And I thought, well, that looks and sounds pretty cool. And I just actually come back from Victoria. We'd done an officials exchange. We fast forward that about 2 years. We'd done an official exchange program between New South Wales and Victoria. I just returned from that and had some really positive feedback from that. And we was our state champs, and I was approached and they said, look, we need to have a chat to you. And I thought, well, okay, what's going on here? And we just want to let you know that you'll be officiating the women's discus final tonight. And they said, oh, here's your start list. And I went through the list and sort of scrolled through, and the first name that jumped out was Danny Stevens. And I thought, oh, okay, crap. Okay, I'm in charge of this. Please don't stuff up. And then I saw Jade Lally and I saw GBR, and I thought, oh, we've got a couple of international competitors here. And Jade actually broke the record that night, the English record, and I had to sign the paperwork. And while all that was daunting, the other daunting part was I had Barry Pico was on my team, and Graham Dwight was on my team, and there's this host of very, very experienced officials who are now answering to me. And I thought, right, if this is what's expected of me, and this is what it's about, then it was after that event and that weekend that sort of really was like, okay, this is there may be something to this. And Yeah, that's really the event that probably consolidated for me, was that there's a chance that, you know, I could be good at this, and I might have an opportunity to take this further. So
thanks, Garth. And in a moment, Kim, I'd like to go to you. I'm sure a lot of people, I mean, there are some other people who are watching tonight who have done international events, and obviously there's some people who haven't. For those people who haven't applied or gone to an international event, what are the steps that you have to do, Kim? In your case, how did you, you know, is there what's the process? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Ask lots of questions. I think I could have done that differently. I think if you don't know, you need to ask. And I think when I headed over to Sydney, I think people told me what I needed to apply for, and I just kind of smiled and nodded my head, and I had no idea what half these events were. So I think I kind of went into it a little bit blindly, in that I didn't really know what was expected of me. So I would definitely ask lots of questions and attend those Athletics New South Wales events. Sort of, I'm talking from a regional perspective as well, just with travel and commitment, is attend those events, ask lots of questions. And if you don't understand, you need to ask to clarify. And yes, when the Com Games sort of, because it was about sort of 2 or 3 years out, we had to put our expressions of interests in, and I was told, yeah, just put it in and see what happens, and come and keep attending these events. And then sort of as it got closer, it got to, I was told, you need to do these events, and these events. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. I can do this. I can commit to this. And just being regional, I even had to call my parents down from Queensland to have them come and sort of take over the running of my family so that I could do it. So, but yeah, they were sort of my steps.
Okay. Now, Katrina, Kim sort of alluded to, maybe, you know, there are a few sacrifices there and things like that. I mean, there's certainly lots of positives and lots of enjoyable moments, but, you know, would you like to talk about some of those and some of the sacrifices that you have to make in getting to these events?
Yes, I think one of the biggest ones that, as anybody would know who does a voluntary role, is the sacrifices you make in terms of time from work, and also financial sacrifices, and they are there. But as I said, my husband and I started the journey together on the basis it was something we could do together, and that's worked really nicely. And if we would do anything differently, it would have been to have taken a more of a travel with a purpose approach in from the start, because initially we would fly in, fly out, so take a business approach to meetings, and David would have to give up, well, we both gave up, you know, annual leave to go, but over the years what we've done is just take made it more of a social thing. So we've extended a stay by a day or two, or we just make a point of making it more social. And the athletics has also taken us, you know, through Oceania, all over Australia, but also to the islands. So it's taken us to places that we wouldn't normally have chosen to go to, and we've got to know the locals and that sort of thing. So yes, there have been the sacrifices, but with that there have come many positives, and you know, and you do get some subsidies for accommodation, so that sort of thing. But yeah, it has been worthwhile in that regard.
Okay, thanks, Katrina. Now, I just should remind anyone, if you'd like to use the chat box, and please do so. If you've got anything you'd like, anything our panel to elaborate on, or anything, or you've got any extra questions, or you'd like to hear something more, please feel free to pop that in the chat box. We'll try and keep an eye on that. It seems like everybody in this experience, I'm sure, would have learnt some lessons, and you know, there might have been some surprises. And I think before Kim said she would do something, a few things differently next time. Now, in a moment, I might go back to you, Steve, to see, if you have anything to add about, that might help, that you can pass on knowledge that you learned along the way that might even help pave the way for other people. As I said, surprises you came across, learnings, things you do differently. So, Steve, can you make any comments on that at all?
Yeah, I think the thing you take away from it is, while you may think you know everything about it, you don't necessarily. There's always other things to learn, particularly when you get to that international level, how stringent you have to be, how precise you have to be in everything that you do. I mean, at the Commonwealth Games, we were beamed all over the world, so we had to be precise in everything that we did. Even little things that I thought I was doing very well, no, do this better, do it this way. And I mentioned at the start the wonderful support of people that I had, and it wouldn't be, if it wasn't for those people, I wouldn't have got where I am now. Just with those little tips and those things, just to do things a little bit, just to refine your officiating in little ways, just to improve.
Okay, and it's interesting, again, we've had that, like the mentoring thing mentioned again. And look, just at this stage, I suppose it's worth mentioning that, in New South Wales athletics, an officiating mentoring program is being worked on at the moment by the Joint Officials Committee, and Tamara doing a fair bit of work on that. So it's interesting to hear all these types of things, that the mentoring side of things is so important. So I think we're heading in the right direction with that. Now I can see in a moment I'll go, Chris, a question to Garth. You can see there's a question to you, Garth, there in a moment that we might go to. But Michael, back to you. Just like the question I just asked to Steve, any learnings, anything that surprised you, things you do differently next time, anything that might help people who are looking to, strive for an international event in the future?
I sort of wish I'd started earlier. I really regret the years I spent away from athletics. It was a really long time, and I just wonder what I might. There's probably a possibility that I might have even gone to Sydney if I'd stayed in athletics rather than drifting away. It's the same answers keep coming back. Ask questions. I like to I guess it's important that if you do, to learn from your mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. It's important, if you do make a mistake, to recognise there was a mistake before someone points out that it was a mistake. You need to change your preparation so that the risk of that mistake happening again is reduced so much that it doesn't happen again. And if you can improve that way, then you're going to go places. You need to show people that you know your stuff, you know the rules, know how to apply them, discretion, and also need to show that you can work as a team. And that's at these international events, it is very much a team where everyone has a specific role to play, and you need to cover each other, but then you need to also know what your boundary is and not step too far out into someone else's area. I don't know if I've exactly answered that question, but that's sort of where I ended up.
No, thanks, Michael. There's certainly some good points there. Katrina, in a moment, I might see if you've got anything that you would like to add to that. But firstly, Garth, I did say there was a question in the chat box, being the person from the call room. The question from Chris there: was there any items identified that shouldn't have been there at all, Garth? Here's some inside knowledge. I don't know what you can tell us, but how would you like to answer that?
I'll start by saying this. If field athletes could take a leaf out of the track athletes book, that would be awesome, because track athletes came in pretty much game ready or dress ready. They had their uniform, they had their jackets or their track pants, they had their spikes and maybe a drink bottle, and that was it. And that's easy to check. Field athletes, yeah, like I said, if they could pack the kitchen sink in, they would. So implements, rollers, occasionally you had certain topical creams had to be checked. We were checking for smartwatches as well. there were certain things. And look, the technology has come along a long way, but not a whole lot. Like the usual stuff that they would usually come through cool rooms, mainly additional implements or implements that they packed in their bags. So that was probably the biggest one. Probably the most interesting one when we were doing the men's decathlon, and that was because it was a request, it wasn't something that they were trying to do. Was from, I won't name the athlete, but one of our lovely, but who's known for having a fondness with social media, wanted his camera confiscated and placed in the confiscated goods. And I gave him the odd look, and I'm bagging it and tagging it. And the referee said, "Why are you confiscating his camera? He doesn't need it." Well, he wants it confiscated, and we found out later there was to document post-event. So he got it out and documenting things in the post-event area and things like that. But that was more from a social media standpoint, and it was nearing the end of competition. He wanted to have some fun with it. So look, that was probably the extent of it. So it's mainly implements, additional implements that they have with them. So
thanks, Garth, and Chris, thanks
Welcome.
for that question. Katrina, that question we were looking at before, learnings, surprises, and anything that you do differently that may help another person following along that path.
Okay, so surprises. As I said, I started in athletics, well, as an athlete, and when I was an athlete, there was no way I ever thought I'd become an official. You know, sorry, there were better things to do. And so when my husband and I became officials, one of the biggest surprises was how similar it was to performing as an athlete, even at the highest level, so to an international level. The similarities are just the same. You've got to work hard, you've got to put in the hours, you're not necessarily paid for it, you work hard, you learn, you get barked at, and then you need to be selected. You know, you build your experience and your knowledge, but you need to be selected to go to certain events and that sort of thing. And with that, you do become part of a team. Even at the interclub level, the club level, you're part of a team, and you develop a camaraderie. And it's that, as silly as it sounds, was my biggest surprise, that I enjoyed the challenge of learning, and you are always learning, because there's always a different way to do the same thing. So there's the challenge of learning, and also, as I said, the camaraderie. The other thing that I found was how athletics really lends itself to being a family, involving the whole family. And I'm country based originally, and I love doing country champs. And country champs and relays are two events where you can see 3 generations competing together. And not only that, you could have, and because I was a support crew, sorry, for my mother and my brother in Masters, and so you can be officiating but still be involved with your family and your children. So all of those things, it was just it was lovely. Yeah.
Thanks, Katrina. I really love that parallel between the athlete and the official. That's absolutely fantastic. And you are right. There's a number of things that do parallel there. So I love that comparison. That's really, really interesting. I'm wondering, we are getting towards the end of this session, and in a moment I'd like to give all of our panelists the opportunity to, you know, make any final comments, tips for officials, you know, that they can pass on. I know we've been getting a few of those already, but if you've got any other moments, you know, funny or quirky moments from your officiating experience, not necessarily even at the Commonwealth Games, but even, you know, your week-to-week type officiating that you would like to share in a moment. But I'm, you know, there are a couple of things that are popping up in the chat box at the moment. Diane was a sport-specific volunteer at the Com Games in the call room, and it was a good experience. And maybe next time, actually, an official, Diane. There's a question there that some people might like to reply to in the chat box. How do we get retired school athletes involved in voluntary work as an official? I think maybe hearing stories like yours, Katrina, is quite helpful for those types of things. But if anyone would like to reply to that, and if you've got any thoughts in the chat box, and please feel free to ask more questions in the chat box. So I'm just going to go to each of the panel members again, and Steve, I might start with you again. Did you have any sort of other stories that you wanted to have from behind the scenes, or final tips, or any other comments in general that you think might be useful to people watching this?
I think, I mean, there's been a lot of tips and a lot of helpful things that people have said, but for me, I did mention this at the start, that one of the greatest things that's come about from officiating athletics is seeing people's journeys, athletes' journeys, from, you know, competing at an event like CHS, going through to an international event or an Australian championship. And one name comes to mind, and that name is Ashlyn Blackstock. A lot of you would know Ashlyn as a thrower. In one of my early years officiating at CHS Carnival, Ashlyn came along in year 7 and threw a 750 gram discus and broke the record. And I said to myself, this girl's something special. She's going to be a great thrower. And, you know, 6 years later, she's about to finish year 12. She was competing at this year's national championships. And it's amazing to see those athletes and the way they develop, and they stick at their sport. And she's definitely going to be something to watch in the future. She's an outstanding athlete, very humble young lady. And it's awesome to see those kind of athletes come through. And not only that, but you develop a bit of a rapport with those kind of athletes as well. Which has been, you know, one of the great things about officiating. You know, she comes back every year to CHS, and you say hello again, and she remembers you from the year before, and you get chatting, and it's those kind of wonderful memories that you have as an official that, that are pretty awesome to be part of.
Thanks, Steve. Kim, I might in a moment go to you next. I'll shuffle up the order just a little bit. Did you have any final messages, comments, anything you'd like to add that we haven't had the chance to speak about yet?
I think the one thing that sort of, as people were talking, the one thing that popped up was when we are sort of officiating in our local areas, we are doing multiple things. We're running events by ourselves. We're grabbing people in from the crowd and things like that. When you do start attending those New South Wales or those Australian meets, I actually loved it, because I only had to think about my one job. And I think I really enjoyed that, was because you were part of this well-oiled machine. You go down, you're given your job, you're given your role, and you're as close to the action as you possibly can be. And it's full on, like, you do work really hard, but you, at those upper level events, your roles are very specific, and that my brain loves that. My brain loves that I don't have to be thinking about 1,000 things at once like we do in our everyday life. So that was sort of my one last thing, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kim. Michael, in a moment I will go to you if you had any further comments, as I said, tips, or anything else you'd like to add, like a story you haven't had the chance to tell as yet.
Yeah, as they say in those Sunday programs, your final tips or observations. Yeah, the days at the venue were quite long. We were fed when we were at the ground, but eventually you got sick of the food because it was not hot. They gave you wraps and sandwiches. It was interesting at first, but then it got a bit tiresome. You're after some real hot food. So when we got back to the accommodation, most people were spending their daily money on pizza and beer. We just wanted to get some hot food. I remember we shared our hotel with a few other sports, particularly weightlifting, which was also at the indoor venue next to the Carrara track, and ended up talking to one of the weightlifting officials. His name was Horst, and he was an ex-German weightlifting official that now worked out of Swaziland. He must have been aged about 70, and after a while, getting to know him, he wanted to show us a photo of his wives. So he has 2 wives, both natives. Neither of them would have been much more than 20, and they were stunning. And apparently, to marry these 2 beautiful women, he had to get the village chief's permission, and he had to guarantee that each of them would have their own house. And he would spend half his time traveling the world at weightlifting. He was been to so many Com Games back to the 60s. I know he does Olympics as well. And yeah, it was just an amazing lifestyle. So that was one of my other enduring memories of my first international meeting Horst.
So meeting a whole variety of people through a role like that. It's fascinating. Thanks for that, Michael. Garth, any final comments, tips, and anything else you'd like to add?
Look, I think a lot of it's been said. Get out there, ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And even picking back off what Kim said, when you're at the national events or a state event and it's your one role, focus on that one role, but keep a keen eye on what your chiefs and referees are doing. And often at times, if things happen, make a mental note, have a conversation with them after. Hey, I noticed this, I noticed that. Why? Because often at times, those scenarios, when they play out, are very good. When you are faced with something like that back at a club level, or even at a representative level, be it at a school meet or whatever, those scenarios come in very handy for helping you, play through things and to be able to problem solve really quickly. So, no, I think just get out, don't be afraid to ask questions, and if you have spare time, even if you're not maybe rostered on for an event and you can see someone else maybe needing some help, offer to help. Because the one thing we certainly do need more of is help, and we're certainly not going to say no to people offering to help. We've, in my experience in the last probably 2 years, that the people that have gone out and done their level 1 have been the people that have jumped the fence. They've enjoyed that experience, and have enjoyed working alongside us. So, please come and help, come and ask questions, because we're more than happy to pass that information on, because I wouldn't be where I am today in the short space of time if people, and some of them are on this forum tonight, I can see their faces, haven't, helped me out, and Kim and Steve and Katrina and everyone else. So it makes a big difference to us, because you feel appreciated for the work you're doing. So, that would be it.
Thanks, Garth. And Katrina, I'd love to give you the opportunity just to see if there's anything that you wanted to add, any final tips or anything that you haven't had the chance to mention as yet.
Just reiterating what other people were saying about learning from mistakes. But we all keep learning. But one of the other big things that happens is that you do keep growing as a person, as an individual, because what you find is that everybody at some point, and including the most senior and most experienced, everybody will make mistakes, and that's okay. Just, learn from those and where you can and move on. And there is stress and pressure at all levels, like Kim mentioned, multitasking at the club level. And as you move up through the ranks, through the events, if you get barked at over the radio, to keep things on time, recognising that the person who's speaking to you is under pressure or stress themselves to keep things moving. So, but that all being said, one of the most important thing is remember just to enjoy it, enjoy the experience. And I remember one of my experiences, and I was just going to the Youth Commonwealth Games in Samoa. And for, I think it was the 3K, I was put on the bell ringing for the bell lap for the, and I was thinking, oh wow, how exciting is this going to be? And it was fun. You had the Kenyans running and leading. What sticks in my mind is that you couldn't hear them. You could hear the whiteys thump, thump, thump. The canyons just flowed, and you had to keep your wits about you to make sure that, you know, you knew when they were coming through. And it just reinforced to me just the caliber of the athletes you do get to work with.
Thanks, Katrina. There's some great observations there. Look, we are almost at a finish here, and Steve has just reminded me. It is worth mentioning. I don't know whether you wanted to speak about this at all, Steve, if you're happy to meet us, for me to quickly speak about it, or did you want to mention about making sure that, I think you're saying, you said in the chat box there, it's really important to keep that accreditation up.
Yeah, like just one of the things, it sort of slips your mind a bit when you're continually doing stuff, that you do need to keep that reaccreditation happening, and keep officiating, keep doing courses, keep your knowledge going, because, you know, new rules come out every year, and updates to the rules come out every year, and it's one of those things that we need to make sure that we're doing consistently is retraining and re-educating and keeping up with the latest information coming through from World Athletics. So don't forget, yeah, if you are one of those people who their accreditation is lapsing soon, make sure you get on that. That's pretty important.
Thanks for that, Stephen. And look, we are reaching, or we have reached that 8 o'clock mark. I really do hope that you've enjoyed this session and got a bit of an inside look about, you know, what it takes to get to an international event, and what it's maybe a bit like when you get there. Steve, Michael, Katrina, Garth, and Kim, thank you very much for your time this evening and your enthusiasm in putting this together and being here. As we are closing, everybody, I do encourage you, if you've got any feedback that you'd like to pop in the chat box, what you enjoyed, or, you know, if you've got any ideas or feedback about, you know, future sessions, or but particularly about this session, that'd be fantastic. So thanks for coming, and Barry, thanks for your work in doing the initial groundwork in getting all of these the panelists together. I think everyone would agree, a fantastic group with some really you know, interesting stories and backgrounds, and it just reinforces, you know, to me, what a great bunch of people that we do have as officials in New South Wales. And, you know,